record on this. Okay. So, we're gonna go over close the year. First thing you should know, I put on the internal list of articles this close the year issues, which is basically just everything I'm gonna go over today, in terms of the kinds of things that users might be writing in about. I highly recommend / require you to watch this video so you understand what the designers are doing from their side for close the year. And just to kind of review what close the year actually is, go to accounting and close the year, you'll notice that every account has a beginning open date and an ending open date, which is essentially saying in Studio Designer, you have 2 years where you can like edit your transactions, edit your financial information. So currently on this test account, I can only date transactions from 2020 to 2022. If you try and let's do this. If you try and do something in another year, like maybe I want to move these void entries to 2018, it's not going to let me because 2018 is closed on this account. And essentially the reasoning for only having open and kind of closing years is that pretty much after you have wrapped up a year and you, I guess, file your financial information with the government, you shouldn't change any of that information. It should be locked and closed, and you shouldn't be allowed really to touch any of it. So Studio Designer lets you have 2 years open, so some time at the end of a year to edit the previous year. So for example, at the end of 2020, you would have opened 2021, and then you had pretty much like all of this year to make sure that all of your 2020 numbers were in order before the end of this year, when users should be, most of them, and you'll definitely come across people who are not doing this, but you should be closing 2020 and opening up 2022 because 2022 is coming and you want to be able to put things in Studio Designer that are dated in 2022. So the process that this training webinar, making sure that they've reviewed all of their accounting reports, made sure their balances are good to go. They probably sent all their numbers for 2020 to their accountant, and then once all that's been cleared, they go ahead and click this button. And I'm actually going to do that now so you see what happens. I'm going to close 2020 on this account. Say OK. And you'll notice now the only open date I can edit starts on the 1st of the 21st. No, the 1st of January in 2021 and ends at the end of. Start doing things in 2022 when the year turns to 2022. You'll also notice that beginning balances happen. So these were just automatically generated by the system when I click that button. And essentially what a beginning balance is, for those who don't know, it's just taking into account whatever the balance was for all of your accounts at the end of the at the end of the previous year. So for example, this cash account, let's just look at the cash account. If I were to from everything from whenever I started Studio Designer, which was sometime in 2020, up until the end of 2020, and I calculated those totals, it would say my balance on the cash account is $5,000. So instead of Studio Designer continuously calculating whatever your balance is on an account by adding and subtracting all the transactions on the account, it basically says, actually, what we're going to do is now that you've closed 2021, we know the balance for this account is $5,048. So we're going to put this beginning balance here, and now we're going to run all these reports and things based off of this beginning balance number at the beginning of 2021 instead. So basically it's like we lock all of your accounting prior to 1/1/21 and we record all the balances so that this system just knows whatever the balance was on the account starting at the beginning of 2021. Cool. So that's what closing the year does. It locks the previous year and opens up a new one, creates these beginning balances. Any questions about that? Because then we're going to go into some issues that might come up before and after this happens. Cool. So let's go through some things, things people might actually write in about. First thing is designers might write in asking to open some accounting years, either the year that's upcoming, open 2020, or a previous year. Maybe they need to open 2019 or 2020. So in this example, someone might write in and say, hey, I'm not done with 2020 yet. I can't close 2020. I still, for whatever reason, still working on finalizing those numbers. Who knows what the reason might be, but they still want to open 2022 because come December 31st of this year, if they don't open 2022 and they start entering payments and things that happened in 2022, they won't get dated in 2022 because 2022 is closed. So they might ask, is there any way we can open 2022 without closing 2020? Essentially having 3 years open on their account, 2020, 2021, and 2022. And this isn't ideal, but for the most part, it's an okay thing for them to do. And how you would do that is that you would go to their account in admin and you would just adjust this fiscal end year date to be opened for 2022, to be 12/31/2022. And that will open up the next year for them and leave 2020 open as well. The only problem that happens with that is that when they do go to close 2020, it will keep 3 years open on their account. So it'll close 2020, but then it'll open 2023. So whenever you do this on someone's account, you open up the next year for them, just make sure you message to them that they need to contact us whenever they do close their year so that we can review their account and make sure there aren't any additional counting years open on their Studio Designer account. So that's if they want to open a future year. Any questions about that I just went over? That's something that I feel like everyone should be able to do. It's just changing the state here and letting them know that they should reach out to us once they do close a previous year. Cool. The next thing that might happen is someone might want to open a previous year. So for example, they currently have, or for whatever reason, they have 2021 and 2022 open on their account, and they realize they need to go back and edit 2020, but it's currently closed on their account. If that happens, there's a little more of an involved process that has to happen. There is a video that Greg made that goes over what you need to do. I would say in general, if someone needs to open a past accounting year, open a year that has passed, if you haven't done this process already, definitely review this video and then contact someone who has done it so that they can go over it with you as you do it, just so that you can learn it. Make sure you do it correctly. It's just like a complicated process, and if you don't do it right, it kind of messes up their numbers and makes it harder to correct down the line. So if someone wants to open a past year, if you aren't familiar with clearing beginning balances and reopening a past year, feel free to send that to accounting or reach out to someone on accounting, say, hey, can you just go over how to do this with me so that I can do it in the future? Or if you're familiar with doing it, I know Greg's done it. I feel like both Hannahs have done it maybe. And
Yeah, I've done it too.
yeah, so if you're comfortable doing it and you know how to do it, great, go ahead. Feel free to do it. Also, if you want to do it and you're still not sure you did it right, always feel free to message me or Lily and be like, hey, I opened the past year on this account. Can you review it to make sure I do it right?
I
And
do
that's
have a
still,
question. Oh,
yes,
sorry.
question.
So whenever the last time I opened up a year for somebody, a past year, they wrote back in, and so Lily took a look at it, and she had messaged me saying that I forgot to like close a year or something. It doesn't state that in the video, so that's why I didn't do it. But do you know what I'm talking about? Because I'm even unsure what I'm talking
Yeah,
about.
it might have been that, like you might have cleared the beginning balances and not like actually, you also need to go in and like push back the fiscal year start date. Like if you're opening 2019, you need to
Uh-huh. But do you have
change
to
this to 1 month.
close it after again? Like, or I guess like
The thing is just that's also a situation where you would want to tell the
user to be like,
to,
hey, hit us up when you
yeah,
do when you're
let us
done
know when you,
changing it.
exactly, because then we do need to go
Okay.
in and make sure they only have 2 years open on their account.
Ah, okay. So that's what I didn't do. And
Yeah,
so they had the 3 years open. Okay,
right.
cool.
It's not a huge deal if they have 3 years open. It's just like they'll have an annoying banner probably on their account, and it just means that there's like more years for them to possibly mess up, to be honest. That's why you try and limit it to a 2-year window. Yeah. So yeah, in general, if you know how to do this process, great, feel free to do it. Always feel free to reach out to us and we can check if you reopened the past year correctly. That still really helps us in terms of, taking off some of the burden of the accounting issues that come in. Any other questions about opening, closing years? Let's talk about some report issues that might happen. So, before they go through the process of closing a previous accounting year, and to state again, what's usually happening right now with users is that they are going to be closing 2020 and opening 2022 so that 2021 and 2022 are open on their account. So what they're probably doing now is that they're reviewing all of their reports for 2020. If they're good and doing a really good job, they're doing that for 2021 as well. But people are usually behind on their accounting when they reach out to us. So let's say one of the reports that, or 4 of the reports that they usually review, and they talk about reviewing in this webinar that one of the consultants did, is the accounts receivable, accounts payable, client deposits, and vendor deposits accounts. There are a couple of issues, most of which are solved. I say the majority of which are solved and don't happen anymore, but did happen in the past in Studio Designer, that just caused the wrong general ledger entries to be created when items were invoiced, or items were added to orders, and those errors will come up on the accounts receivable, accounts payable, all these reports. So for example, the accounts receivable and accounts payable report, that's supposed to show items. Accounts receivable shows items that are invoiced and still need to be paid. Accounts payable also shows items on orders that have been invoiced and still need to be paid. And it's possible that because of these accounting errors that happened in Studio Designer, these invoices were paid or they were voided and they're still showing up on the accounts receivable report or on the accounts payable report. If that's the case, it's something that accounting needs to handle. But what would be really helpful before you pass things on to accounting is that you just get clarification from the person writing in what invoices or what purchase orders are showing up on these accounts payable or accounts receivable reports. That shouldn't be, so that we can take a look. Most of the time, especially if it's a consultant writing in, they know like, hey, accounts receivable invoices 1, 2, 3, and 4 are showing up when they shouldn't be, and they include all that information up front, which is really helpful. But sometimes if it's just, someone, a standalone accountant or random designer reviewing their books, realizing it's wrong, they're just going to say, oh, I have these things wrong in my accounts receivable. And so it's helpful just for you to clarify, okay, what invoices, what items, what are you looking at that you say is wrong, so that we know specifically what to look at. You can also review what all these reports are supposed to be by clicking this link, which takes you to another accounting reports internal article that just reviews what these reports do. Accounts receivable shows invoice amounts due, how much the client still owes the designer for an invoice. Accounts payable shows the balance due to the vendor on purchase orders, but only for items that have been invoiced for the client. You can use this to familiarize yourself with what these reports do.
Brian, quick question.
Yes.
So are all of so client deposits is a financial report, so it can't be customized, but the accounts payable and receivable, I think, are both available in the standard reports. Are all versions of those standard reports supposed to tie perfectly back to the balance sheet?
Yes.
Okay. So as long as you run it wide open, no filters, no dates, any of the 3 accounts payable reports should tie exactly back to that account on the balance sheet.
Right. Yeah. As long as you're doing it for the same date, like balance sheet on today's date. Yeah. But that's another issue that I will be talking about in a bit, because that sometimes can happen. They can sometimes be off. But just to review what client deposits and vendor deposits are. Client deposits are payments that are on items, client payments from items that have not been invoiced. So whether it was paid on a proposal but not invoiced, or even just a payment was applied to the item and it's not on a proposal or an invoice, that payment will show up in client deposits. Similarly for vendor deposits, it's a vendor payment that is on an item that has not been invoiced to the client. And so someone might write in and say, hey, I have these items on my client deposit report, but I totally invoiced them. See, they're on an invoice. Why is it showing up on the report? If that's the case, it's probably some issue with the general ledger entries that were made. So accounting needs to review it, but you can get from them, if it's client deposits, it's helpful to get just what client has the incorrect client deposit amount. We can usually figure it out from there. Or if it's a vendor deposit issue, it will say what purchase order is having the problem. So either a vendor or a purchase order that they're seeing that shouldn't be on there. Cool. Any questions about accounts receivable, accounts payable, client deposits, vendor deposits? Cool. So the next issue Robert was talking about is if there is a number on the balance sheet that is not matching the report. So if you look at a balance sheet, this is an example of a balance sheet. It's going to have a client deposit amount on there. That amount should match the total on the specific client deposit report that's in the system. And just to review where all these reports are, go to reports, client deposit and vendor deposit will be under the financial form section. And then accounts receivable will be standard reports. Accounts payable will be also standard reports. So if a user writes in and says, hey, I ran a balance sheet for the end of 2020, but it's not matching the total client deposits on the balance sheet isn't matching the client deposits on my client deposit report, that's also probably another weird, less common, but sometimes happens general ledger issue. Once again, it's good to ask them what balances are off. If they're saying like all their balances are off, it's probably a beginning balance issue, which is an issue with these that were generated. Sometimes in the past they were duplicated. Greg and I were looking at an issue yesterday where just like 2 accounts didn't have a general ledger entry a beginning balance entry created in the past. So it might be an issue with these, or it could be just an issue with how the entry was created in 1.0. You don't need to know the details of how it was created, just it's helpful to know what accounts they're saying are unbalanced so that we can take a look and investigate what happened to make the balances off. Yeah, any questions about that or about balance sheet in general? Cool. So the next issue that might come up is that the balance sheet is unbalanced. And that's sad because it's called a balance sheet, so it should be balanced. And what they mean by that is that in accounting, your total assets, which is this total on the balance sheet, should equal the liabilities plus equity amount, which it does on this, which is great. We have a balanced balance sheet. And that should generally always equal because you'll notice, and then we've gone over some past training stuff, if you look at any entry that happens in the system, let's look at this void entry, for example, you'll notice that there's a positive 20 entry that was made and then 2 negatives. Every entry is balanced. If you add up everything that is entered in at once, it should always equal 0. If you try and enter a general ledger entry, a journal entry, it won't let you post it unless the total comes to 0. So that's just the nature of double entry accounting. Every entry you make should total to 0. It has to have 2 entries, 1 positive, 1 negative, at least. So Studio Designer is built to kind of just not let that happen. But as I mentioned, there were these issues in the past with accounting entries not being created correctly. So sometimes unbalanced entries show up. If that's the case, we have to look into when it went out of balance and figure out and create some new entries to make it balanced. But for the most part, if someone writes in saying that their balance sheet is unbalanced, you can just maybe just put that in a note or assign it to accounting because there's nothing really specific you need to ask from them. If they're saying their balance sheet is unbalanced, that's all we need to know to know what the issue might be or look into it. Any questions about that?
You don't want people to find the month that it went out of balance?
If I'm going to explain how you can find that. I feel like it sometimes can be pretty complicated, but an easy way to kind of check to see if it went out of balance. Let's do this actually. Let's make account go out of balance. Actually, I'm surprised that. Yeah, balance. Look, that also might happen, cause things to come out of balance, but I guess that will. Let's just do this. Cool. So users aren't allowed to do that. I just broke it so that we could figure out how it was broken. So say this user wrote in and said, hey, my accounts are out of balance. And if we look at a balance sheet report, it isn't. 88,472, not equal to 87,365. You could help out accounting by figuring out what month it goes out of balance. And an easy way to do that is to set the date from on the general ledger to probably their earliest open date. So you could say, okay, if they have 2021 open, and if you do calculate totals, you'll see if you have nothing selected on the filter except the dates, the total should be 0 because the debits should equal the credits and they should cancel out to 0, but it's off by $1,000. You can go back and keep changing the date range to see when it goes back to 0. I'm going to keep clicking through. Nope. Still out of balance from January to June. Out of balance from May. April. Oh, look. Starting March 4th, it's balanced in March. So I'm going to keep clicking. Still in balance. Up, out of balance on the 9th. And then it's in balance on the 8th. But that would be helpful, even just saying to accounting, hey, it looks like the account goes out of balance on March 9th, 2021. So that we know what date it goes off. The thing is, usually a lot of the times it's out of balance in many different places. So that's one thing that would help. But if you can't figure it out or you don't really understand this process, that's fine. It doesn't take too much time for us to narrow it down. Or another thing you can do is if you click this repair tools on their account and go to general ledger errors and click this no account entry, if you see anything pop up here under no account, you can just note that in the ticket. Say like, hey, their account is out of balance and they have entries in the no account field. That also will help us understand where to look, where to go first. Yeah, if you have the time and want to play around to see when it goes out of balance, that would be helpful. But if you can't figure that out, or you play around with the dates and you can't find the date it goes out of balance, don't worry about that. Just let us know that it's out of balance. Any questions about that? Cool. Great, so that's sort of like the main sort of issues I'd say would come up. Another thing that we've been getting a lot of lately, and I wanted to go over with everyone's slash will also sometimes come up at the end of the year, is people not really understanding the sales tax reporting. For the most part, sales tax reporting is correct, but it can get confusing when people are avoiding or correcting invoices on their account. So for example, the thing to keep in mind with sales tax reports, which are these main sales tax reports in the reporting section, is that they function based off of the date that's being set. So if you you create an invoice in June, that sales tax will be dated in June on the sales tax report. If then in July you go and you void that invoice, the void entry, which is like a negative amount on the sales tax report, will be dated in July. So if in July you run a sales tax report for June, and this happens a lot, users will say, hey, I voided this invoice in July. Why is it still showing up in my June report? And that's because the void entry is dated in July. So you create an invoice in June, you void it in July, and then you run the sales tax report just for June, from June 1st to June 30th or whatever. That invoice is still going to show up there. So it's not an error of the report, it's just that the void isn't included on the report because you're not running the dates for the report or the void entry. But if you ran a sales tax report for June and July, the sales tax won't show up because the entry was voided in June. So you're now including that void in your reporting. So in general, if someone writes in and says, hey, this sales tax amount shouldn't be showing on the report, there are a few things that could be a system issue that might happen. But the important thing to get from them is what dates are you running the report for, and helpful for the user to review and for you to review, when was that invoice voided or when was it created? Because the report needs to be run for that full activity of when it was created and voided, for it to show up essentially correctly on their report. They could, yeah. So to go over that, how that actually looks, we do GL by invoice. And if I run a report for October, like we have some invoices that are showing up. Sales tax of $59.38 for this invoice. I'm going to now go and void it. I've already voided it. Nope. I'm going to void this invoice. Yes, void it. I voided it. Great. Now I'm going to run my sales tax report again for this deal. Oh, yeah. Show up still. Yeah, it does. Great. So great. I'm running it for October. Why is my sales tax still showing up on this October sales tax report when I voided it? See, look, it's voided. There shouldn't be any sales tax reported. That's because the void entries for this report are dated in November. See, this is the sales tax amount, it's being voided. So it's still going to show up if I'm just running things in October, but I run it for November now. The sales tax for this invoice has been removed because it's now including that void that happened in November. So the thing is just to keep in mind in general, with sales tax report, everything depends upon the date that the sales tax report is being run by. If you have any confusions about that, you can always reach out to accounting, pop in the accounting chat, assign it to accounting. But just initially, if you're looking at something and the user's confused, they don't understand why things are appearing on the sales tax report, know that the date is probably the issue or thing you need to look at here.
I have
Any
a
questions about that?
question.
Yeah.
Yeah. Could they, like, if it really bothers them that badly, could they change the date of that void to match the date on the report?
Yeah, so they could always go in and say, I want this void to happen in October. I don't know what the best accounting practices is for that, but if for whatever reason their accountant says, yeah, let's just void this, make sure it's all clean and reported as voided in October, they can change that date. And when we run the October report, it'll still be voided, not showing the sales tax because we moved it to October. Yeah, so they can do that. If they want to do that, that's something that you would probably says like you want to talk to a bookkeeper or an accountant on if that's a good practice. But essentially, yes, if you need to change the date that you voided it, you can find it on the general ledger and change the date. Any other questions? So those are the main big things to keep in mind. Once again, for all these issues, it's the majority of you aren't expected to actually go in and fix them. It's just so you are familiar with the kinds of things that will be coming in. You know some follow-up questions to ask when you come across these issues, and then you can assign them to accounting to correct. Just so you're familiar with these issues as they come in. Anything else? Any other general questions about closing the year? Other issues you know of that you feel like might be related? No, I'm gonna put this main support squad. Once again, watch this webinar, and I would also say, well, review this article just so you're familiar with these reports, because I'll have lots of questions about them end of year. All right. Anybody have anything else?
No, but can we go over the client portal issue?
Yeah,
I
we'll
told
go
you?
over that after this. Anybody have any other issues, questions?
I just have one more question. Are you gonna put this on that internal knowledge base article?
The recording?
Like the recording? Yeah.
I will do that. Cool. I'll stop recording.